One of the things that I talked about in one of my deleted videos or censored videos that I wanted to talk about here, and I figure if I rephrase it a little bit, I can get away with talking about it. It's a very important point that I made when discussing a certain other subject that the point deserves to have its own video. The accusation in reference to the words racist and racism in this country, in the world at large actually, is a lie. Every time this word is used, it's being used deceptively every single time. And I'm going to explain to you why. And I'm also going to explain to you that in certain contexts, bigotry is a virtue. And here is a concrete reason why bigotry is not always a bad thing. I would say that bigotry is actually pretty rarely a bad thing. And that the greatest failure of the right is not just saying, oh, the left are the real racists. The failure is not understanding why the racism of the left is successful, and in some cases, even justified. Of course, rarely, pretty much 99.9% of the time, it's not justified because they're lying about what they call racist, and their reasons for their own racism are unsupported and unjustified. So let me explain how bigotry can be justified. There is an unspoken accusation every single time somebody accuses you of being racist, and it's built into the definition of racism. Now, most people would say the definition of racism is the belief in the supremacy of one race or the inferiority of another, or actions based on these prejudices. However, what is always implied every single time is that racism and bigotry is not just a prejudicial hatred or a prejudicial distrust or a prejudicial whatever. It is implied that this prejudice is irrational. It's implied that you do not have a well-supported reason for your bigotry. If a black person actually did experience racism from whites every day, like, say, a black in Alabama in the black and white era of television, would you call a distrust and hatred of whites in that black person's life irrational or unsupported or unreasonable? If you were a white person in an inner city, in a mostly black neighborhood, who experienced racism and abuse from blacks every single day, or even a black person who doesn't conform to their own culture. I've met black people who hate black people. People who are called coons or Uncle Ruckus or whatever. And when they told me about how, I met a kid who was a valedictorian of his school, straight A's, going to an Ivy League, and what he told me was he couldn't wait to be around just white people all the time. He was sick to death of being bullied for scholastic achievement. He was sick to death of being harassed and attacked for acting white. And he told me, you know what? I actually hate black people, and I can't wait to get away from them. Now, he said outright, he is a racist. He hates all other black people. But he supported all the reasons why. Now, the other thing is that what is considered, what another thing that is a lie built into accusations of bigotry and racism is the idea that you hate every single person of a race and not the amalgamation of the race as a whole. I've gotten called racist all the time for criticizing black culture and criticizing basically the average black person. However, there is bazillions of black people who do not fit the profile of what I criticize quote-unquote black people for. And I don't think I should have to say that my criticisms of black people do not apply to these specific black people because they are not the stereotype. And that's another thing. People act like because there are exceptions to rules, that means the rules do not exist. Stereotypes are stereotypes for a reason, because they are true and factually accurate. And just because there are exceptions to these stereotypes does not mean that the stereotypes are irrational, unreasonable, unfounded, and unsupported. That is a lie. So, if you're dealing with a group of people who at large are hostile to you, their lifestyles, their behaviors, their opinions, their worldviews, everything they have at large is antithetical to, hostile to, toxic to, and counterproductive to your values, your goals, your health and safety, how is it a bad thing to hate those people? How is it not constructive to malign those people? How is it not a good thing to criticize those people? Critical race theory isn't bad because it's stereotypical and racist. Critical race theory is bad because it lies about whites. It lies about whites' contribution to the human race. It lies to the extent of which whites are guilty of abuse towards other races. Just because it is true that segregation was wrong, and it was wrong because it was compulsive, not because, and it was the law, and people were fascistically punished for violating it. Segregation should be allowed as a choice, and is in fact generally natural. When I grew up, I didn't really meet any black people, hardly at all, except for like a few here and there that were like family friends who were like engineers. They were smart, very cultured people. I didn't encounter like black culture at large until I moved to Texas. And not only did I not like having stuff stolen out of my backpack all the fucking time by black people or black students, and but I also noticed that these people didn't hang out with white students, and white students didn't hang out with them. And it was self-segregation. There were black tables, and whites didn't sit at them, and blacks didn't sit at white tables. And there were no rules. There were no enforcement. It was not spoken. It was people just hanging out with their own people. So, was it racist for the white people to sit amongst their friends who were white? Was it racist for the black people to sit amongst their friends who were black? Now, critical race theory would have you think that, yes, the whites were unconsciously biased and were hateful towards blacks, and that's why they sat amongst themselves. It wasn't that they had different interests, different culture. It wasn't because they talked in a different way about different things. And it wasn't that they are literally have an evolutionary biological instinct to more often than not hang amongst the people who look like them and sound like them, and that the blacks were doing the same thing. Was that wrong? So, the important thing to consider is that you should roll your eyes at all times. Even when a conservative is calling a liberal racist, you should still roll your eyes, because there's virtually nothing useful or constructive to even discussing racism. You shouldn't have to even bring up crime statistics. You shouldn't have to bring up fatherlessness. You shouldn't even have to bring up rampant crime, and you shouldn't even have to bring up any of that shit. You should have to look at, is it racist to enforce, do law enforcement on blacks because they commit more crime and therefore have more encounters with police and therefore have more potentially bad or unjustifiable results of those encounters with police? That's basically statistical inevitability. But if you look at what people think is a proper response to problems with unlawful encounters with the police, and I'm saying as in like the police unlawfully arrest or unlawfully abuse or unlawfully use force, whatever, people think the proper response to that is literally removing enforcement. And what you're getting is like in San Francisco, the big news stories where people are just running all through there, stealing shit, and then reselling it. And there's nothing done about it because not only does these stores have a policy of not physically interfering with shoplifters, but they have a district attorney who will not prosecute these offenses. And in fact, it's in the law that you can only get charged with an absolute slap on the wrist misdemeanor for theft of nearly $1,000. There are places where like $1,000 of theft is considered like a felony larceny. Most places it's a little bit more than 1,000. It's more like 3,000 to 10,000 is considered felony larceny. But you basically get no punishment at all, besides like a fine and maybe some probation, if you even get prosecuted for stealing $1,000 of merchandise from a store in broad daylight. And then you wonder why Walgreens and CVS and these stores are closing all their shops in places like San Francisco. And you wonder, why does crime go up when law enforcement goes down? Because law enforcement isn't just punishment for crime, it's a deterrent to the start of crime. Basically, threat of punishment is vital, and it's not just a racial thing in that way, by the way. Whites will break the law if you let them as well. And in fact, breaking the law in white-collar ways is completely allowed, and that's part of the reason why this country is going completely to shit, because white people and Jewish people are doing all that stuff at a grand scale in Wall Street, in banking, in finance, in politics. So, and also people of other races are in smaller amounts doing that as well and getting away with it. And as long as they can get away with it, they will continue to do it. So is it bigotry to enforce the law in order to protect society from these people? The answer is no. So I think it's cartoonish when the playing field isn't level. That's part of the reason why critical race theory is wrong, because it's not designed even to punish people, white people, for the crimes they're actually guilty of as a whole. It's designed to expand unreasonably, without facts, to lie about the extent of the crimes of whites, and it's also designed to excuse any and all 100% of the crimes of blacks and other minorities. And the purpose of this doctrine, the purpose of it as intended by the people who created critical race theory, is to perpetuate irrational, unsupported, and unreasonable hate. And I say it's not wrong because it's hate. It's wrong because it's a lie. If you hate somebody for something they truly did to wrong you, whether it's at a macro general on average scale between demographics, or more reasonably and more concretely, something that actual people of a group in your life did to you directly, it's not wrong to hate them. And in fact, I think that one of the greatest things that leftism and liberalism has done to cripple this country is, and to cripple the West, is to remove your right to judge others for what they do. You have a right to judge people. You have a right to be disgusted by people. You have a right to consider people despicable who are themselves actually disgusting and despicable. And the only thing that you can really do wrong is confuse macro hate with micro hate. If you automatically hate strangers that you have not met, strangers as in individuals, that is wrong. If you distrust and are suspicious of those individuals until they prove themselves exceptions to the rule, that's not wrong. If you continue to hate people who have proven themselves exceptions to a stereotype, then you are wrong. If people fit the stereotype and you don't look down on and despise them for fitting a negative and toxic stereotype, you are wrong. You should hold that against them. So, let's see if a video without slurs that is as, low on swears and slavering anger can get past the censors, or if this is once again flirting with disaster in a third strike. I'm saying rationally and logically why racism is not bad, including racism against whites if it's justified. The problem with things like liberalism, critical race theory, progressivism, is because they are pathological liars who lie about every single thing they say, every single subject they say, whenever they open their mouths. Progressives, liberals, all of the above, communists, Marxists, feminists, all leftism, all they ever do is lie 100% of the time without exception. That's why they're bad, because they do not tell the truth. If the truth is racist, if facts are racist, as the line back in 2016 used to be, then they are not wrong. Because they're right because they're factual, reasonable, logically, statistically supported, okay? Racism is only wrong if it's rational, and every accusation of racism comes within the implication, the subtext, that they are calling you irrational, that they're saying you don't have any reason to hate. Virtually everybody has a reason to hate a stereotypical group, a logical, supported reason to hate that outgroup. And I say it's wrong to not hate them if the reasons are valid and justified. And that the problem that we're dealing with is that there is a perversion of what these words, hate, disgust, disapproval, whatever, mean. That nobody admits that there's an implication of irrationality. Okay, so that's the summary there. 20 minutes is long enough. I didn't mean to repeat myself, but it was important to summarize these concepts because they will be dismissed out of hand by people who have been trained parrots, NPCs. Racism is bad because racism bad. No, why is racism bad? The answer to that question is the implication of rationality, logical conclusions drawn. If there is a proven reason to be bigoted, how is it wrong? That's the question I'm asking you, that you can tell me in the comments. Because if there's one thing conservatives are right, but they're always wrong in the way they frame it, is that yes, the liberals are the real racists. Every single solitary, every single part of the liberal platform, all of it, 100% is built on hatred. It's either hatred of class, hatred of race, hatred of in-group versus out-group. Every single solitary part of the liberal agenda is based on hate. So you got to ask, why am I not a liberal if I think hate is justified? It's because they always lie. Dishonesty is fundamentally evil. I'm not evil because I tell the truth. Period. That's the nature of logos, that shit that Jordan Peterson was always talking about, and using fancy, difficult to understand ways to describe an extremely brutally simple concept. Telling the truth is vital to society and vital to the health and sanity of the person in the society. And the reason why our society is sick and diseased and decadent and falling apart is because everybody everywhere is fucking lying constantly. And the only cure is the truth.